a nutrition and diet talk by Lisa Johnson. Lisa Johnson. Oh, thank you. So I'm going to switch over to her PowerPoint. If you want to grab a coffee real quick, a drink, get comfortable again. Now, our next speaker is Lisa Johnson. She's going to be talking about what's good for the gut in geriatrics. So please help me welcome her.
Thank you. I actually chose this topic. It was something that I wanted to do more research on. So I chose this topic so that I could research it more. Now I am going to narrow it down to more the microorganisms and the bacteria in the gut. I'm not going to be talking about anything and everything having to do with nutrition in the gut because it's just too large of a topic to talk about. But I'm hoping that by the end of this talk that you will be motivated to eat a few different things, including the asparagus that we shouldn't be putting on trays. So this is a little fuzzy, but in the gut there's trillions of bacteria that if you've now, after this talk, I promise you, every newspaper you pick up, every magazine you look at, you're going to see an article about investigations on what's going on in the gut. And so one of my dreams is that we will, instead of when you go to the doctor, what happens if you have indigestion or GERD, or if you have an acid stomach or diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and you go to the doctor, what do they usually prescribe? A variety of things: antacids, antibiotics, antimicrobials, something to stop the diarrhea, something to change the pH of the stomach. But do they really get to what's wrong with the stomach? Let's get the stomach healthier. And maybe if we get the stomach healthier, we won't have the problems with the nausea and the indigestion and things like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So in the the gut bacteria is also called the microbiome, and the definition of the microbiome is one of the things that we're going to be talking about. And also we're going to be talking about how our gut flora change throughout life, how our microbiota affect our health. We're going to review some of the studies. There's the studies as far as the flora in the stomach are really in their infancy, but you're going to see that they're starting studies, and some of them are here at the VA for all kinds of things in relation to gut health and how they prevent a whole list of diseases. What we can do to improve our microbiome, and we're going to talk about some research opportunities. So the definition of microbiota, and so there's microbiome, microbiota, gut flora, all of these are kind of interchangeable terms. But the microbiota is the combination of microorganisms that make up a complex and diverse community living within a given anatomical niche, which in our case for today we're going to be talking about the human digestive system. So the gut microbiota play an important role in the health of humans, and they contribute to overall metabolism and play a role in converting food into nutrients and energy. So if you pay attention to that, play a role in converting food into nutrients and energy, that plays a big role in aging. So if our gut flora are not working properly in aging, then that plays a role in converting the food we eat into nutrients and energy. So the microbiota are 100 times, there's 100 times more bacterial cells in the human body than there are genes. And if you put all the bacteria in the human body together, there's about 3 pounds, and it would be about the size of a basketball. So, I mean, it's huge. And there's way too many varieties and species to talk about individually, but so we're talking about it really as a collective unit. So So here's a picture of the intestinal microflora, and it just goes through some of the varieties of microorganisms, where they would be located in the digestive system, and kind of an overview of the numbers. So you can see it's extensive. So one of the things to point out here is that if you're having a problem with digestion, you can't really go get a pill that supplements lactobacilli because it's not necessarily going to be the cure-all. So there's a lot of other things that we can do to kind of get a bigger picture as far as the flora that are needed in the digestive system. So throughout the life cycle, when babies are in utero, they are in a sterile environment. And so as they pass through the birth canal is when they develop their first microorganisms in the gut. And then, of course, that is compounded when they start feeding, whether it be breast milk, which would have more microorganisms than a sterilized formula would. This is the baby, and these are the microorganisms descending upon them upon birth. So by age 4, the gut microbiota is fully matured, and it remains pretty constant until about the age of 70. And there's quite a bit of research going on as far as the changes in the elderly, and then how this contributes to diseases. And as far as sarcopenia is concerned, which is the loss of muscle in aging, so they're thinking that the changes in the microbiota of the gut play a role into that loss of muscle mass. You know, I know a lot of articles are focusing on getting elderly to eat more, get them to eat more protein. But if your gut isn't really using that and not breaking down the amino acids in order for it to be absorbed into the body, then you know, it may not be as effective to increase the protein. And the loss of muscle mass in the elderly is contributing to falls and debility and loss of independence, and so really this is a huge area of research. There's so many things that potentially could be helped by changing the flora in the stomach. So some of the factors that influence the gut microbiota would be the genetic makeup, antibiotics, and like it says, a single dose can affect the microbiota for as long as 4 weeks, assuming that you do something to regenerate the microbiota. If not, then it could stay compromised for a much longer period of time. Pasteurized foods. I don't know if y'all are familiar with pasteurization, but it's something that we didn't have in previous years. And then what it is they flash heat. They heat, like milk, for an example, that you buy in the grocery store, is heated to kill the bacteria just for like 4 seconds, and then it's cooled. So it doesn't really cook the food, it just kills the bacteria. Now this was very, very helpful. It helped us get rid of a lot of diseases that we were having problems with. But did we kind of go overboard to where everything's pasteurized now and we don't have really enough of the microbes growing in the foods? The other thing is more attention to sanitation. I don't know if you think back to the way your mother or your grandparents cooked. I know my mom, she cooked a pot of soup, leave the lid to where it kind of sealed, and leave it on the stove overnight. Do you think I'd touch that? I'm a dietitian. We make sure that we refrigerate within 2 hours. We would never eat anything if it stayed in the refrigerator for more than 3 days. Well, are we being a little too stringent? Are we making sure that we're, you know, anything that grows any bacteria whatsoever, are we throwing it away? So I know some of the guidelines kind of stretch that, you know, the preserving food, you can actually eat it for a little bit more than 2 days. And maybe it can be left out for 4 hours instead of 2. So, you know, on the flip side, we did get rid of a lot of diseases and problems by implementing these pasteurization and sanitation, but did we go overboard is the question. So we kind of, you know, went one way, do we kind of need to come back to center? And other factors would be less fermented foods. If you think about it, every nationality really had some form of fermented food that they ate, whether it be the, say the Germans, they always made sauerkraut at home, and they made it in a crock, and they put a plate with a rock on it, and they let it ferment, and when it started smelling sour, then they knew it was ready, and they put it in the refrigerator, and they ate it for a period of time. Well, that bacteria that made it sour is still active in that sauerkraut. Well, how do we buy sauerkraut now? We buy it in glass jars or in cans, where it was heat treated, and so all the bacteria that was in it that made it sauerkraut is now no longer alive and no longer viable. So the only way to get sauerkraut that's fermented is either to make it yourself or buy it at a health food store, or a lot of farmers markets are now really expanding in the fermented foods areas. So it's just in it, and if you think back in cultures, they used to make their own cheeses, and the way you do that is you take milk and you put it in a cheesecloth and let all the whey come out of it, and then you let it hang there for a couple of days until it gets nice and ripe and kind of dry. Well, all those microorganisms are growing while it's doing that process. So so we kind of, in the process of where we started making things and making them safe and to where they could be preserved for longer periods of time, we kind of did away with a lot of the natural bacteria that was present in our foods in previous years. There's less breastfeeding now, and as I mentioned, sterile formulas that you purchase or powdered formulas that you add water to don't have the microbiotics in there, microflora in it that breast milk would. So, one researcher in one of the articles I read had a type 1 diabetic child, and so he was trying to think of, all the inflammation and all the autoimmune factors that could have contributed to, in addition to the genetic factors of why this child became diabetic. And one was that they were born by C-section, so they didn't go through the birth canal, so they didn't get the bacteria from the birth canal. And then they weren't breastfed, and then they were on antibiotics early. And so, is there proof that that contributed? No, but it's just kind of interesting how the research field is kind of pointing in that area. More medications that alter the pH of the digestive system. Well, if you think of the stomach is very acidic, well, what do we do if we have GERD or heartburn? We take an antacid, which neutralizes the stomach, and so therefore the bacteria that thrive in that acidic environment can no longer do that. So we really change the pH throughout the stomach and the intestines by taking different medications. And we don't even know the effect of other medications on the pH of the intestines. So that'll be another interesting thing. So here's a diagram that just kind of tells you about the intestinal microflora and all the different things that could have in a role. Like age could impact, and it usually does after the age of 70. Obesity, cancer, different diseases, the immune response, infections, drugs, climate, stress, of course, diet again, antibiotics, exogenous organisms, nutrition, physiological function, and so there's just so many factors that alter what we have living inside of us. So the benefits of the good or the symbiotic gut bacteria is that they help supply essential nutrients. The gut microflora actually help with the production of amino acids. They help metabolize indigestible compounds. So when we eat foods, and we're supposed to eat foods with more fiber in them, and what that fiber does is it goes through the intestinal system, the digestive system, and part of that fiber stays and comes out the other end. But the purpose of that fiber is to give substrate for the microorganisms to live on while they're in the gut. And with the right microflora, it helps to synthesize energy and things like that in the gut. It also helps defend against colonization by harmful bacteria, and it can prevent infection. So if you had a healthy gut, you wouldn't have invasions of C. diff and E. coli and bacteria like that that were really running rampant in hospital settings now. They also help prevent or produce energy. They help regulate mood. They found that certain microflora actually secrete serotonin, and so really we know that's very important with our positive moods. Other benefits are that they contribute to the development in the intestinal architecture. So if you have a good, healthy gut, you're not going to have invasions. But if you don't, that's when carcinogenics and different pathogens can come in and cause problems that they couldn't have invaded the body had it been a healthy intestinal architecture. Also, it may be linked to the proper functioning of the immune system, can help prevent inflammatory diseases, prevention of malnutrition, because if you're properly synthesizing the nutrients in the gut, then you're going to be absorbing them versus them going straight through. And then prevention of allergies. There's huge in research as far as prevention of allergies. If you have the right microflora in the gut to break down lactose in milk or the gluten in wheat, then you're not going to have the allergies that are so many of our children and elderly are experiencing now. So some of the negative changes that occur when we don't have the good bacteria in the gut would be inflammatory and metabolic disorders such as Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, obesity, insulin resistance, and there's a lot of research going on today, because when somebody's diagnosed with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, they get put on medications to help that. But do they really get put on, to where we're improving the gut and improving the flora in the gut in order to prevent, the problems with those. And then as far as obesity is concerned, that's extremely interesting too, because they found that in obese individuals, the flora is totally different than lean, and we have that coming up. And then as far as insulin resistance, there's a lot of research in as far as this, and there's a research opportunity here that I'll show you about later. But in insulin resistance, this is where the GIP and the GLP, and those are the gut hormones, but the gut hormones are affected by the microbiota in the gut. So, wouldn't that be wonderful, along with all of our other medications, if we could also help diabetes by improving the gut? And I don't know, quite a few of you were here on Wednesday, and you heard over and over from Dr. DeFranzo how diet doesn't work, exercise doesn't work. But wouldn't it be wonderful if getting the gut better would help? So who knows? We don't know that yet. But, and then cancer, by getting healthy gut, can we help prevent cancer? There's a lot of research in that area too. So here's some differences in the microbiota between obese and lean individuals. If you see, there's greater fatty acid oxidation in obese than lean. There's greater or less fatty acid oxidation, greater lipopolysaccharide, which translates into inflammation in the obese individuals. There's greater short-chain fatty acid, which encourages the lipogenesis, and there's less of the butyrate production, which is produced by the human microbiome, and it's essential for a well-functioning colon. So in individuals that are obese versus the lean, they just have this microbiota going on, and so it's kind of promoting more obesity. So this is the area of research in obesity. Major types of gut bacteria. This is the firmicutes. These are the gram-positive. It's the largest group. It has lots and lots of bacteria, including lactobacillus, clostridium. And then there's the bacteroidetes, and these are gram-negative. There's about 20 subgroups, and then the actinobacteria. So just to give you some examples. And then specific to the elderly, things that may affect the intestinal microbiota would be the deterioration of the teeth. And if you think about it, if you're swallowing foods whole and you're not chewing them up, there's the digestive process and the introduction of the bacteria start in the mouth. So if you're not having the mixture of the food with the saliva as it goes down, then you've got altered metabolism going on all the way through the gut. And then also, if there's a deterioration of dentition, and I'm sure anybody that's in healthcare has seen some pretty horrific mouths with decayed teeth and periodontal disease, and so those are producing negative bacteria, and so those would have an effect all the way through the intestinal tract. Changes in salivary function, there's a lot of dry mouth in the elderly, and so therefore there wouldn't be the substrate for the microflora to live on. Changes in digestion and intestinal transit time, like in diabetes, it can either be sped up or it can be slower. So if you have a greater digestion time, or if they have a C. diff bacterial infection and they're having diarrhea, then things are coming out and there's not a chance to ferment or to work on the substrate. Or if they've had intestinal surgeries or any adhesions or ileus or any of those. And then, of course, medications we talked about briefly before, that if it changes or alters the pH of the stomach, then it's going to affect the elderly. So some of the research, and if you see this is, a lot of the research is pretty recent. This was in Aging in December of 2013. It was a study that compared the microbiota of 64 older people, 21 centenarians, 22 elderly, 21 offsprings of centenarians, and then they included 20 younger adults for controls. And they found a reduction in the microbiota of the production of the essential amino acids. And again, this is involved, they think, in the development of sarcopenia. Loss of genes involved in the metabolism of carbohydrates. So if you're actually eating the food, but you're not able to get the energy out of it, that is a problem in the elderly. And I know I'm a clinical dietitian at the VA. I work in the CLCs, the community living centers, and I also do home-based primary care, and I also do consulting in long-term care nursing homes after hours. So I have a lot of people that I see on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And I'm always, a lot of people think, well, I'm not doing anything, I just lay here. Well, in many cases, it takes a lot of food and nutrients to keep these elderly from losing weight. And a lot of it could be because they're not really absorbing the nutrients that they're being given. And then also, a study that's coming up, there's a difference between those who live in the community and those who live in institutions. There's a reduction of the abundance of genes and pathways involved in the short-chain fatty acid production, as we saw the difference between the obese and the lean individuals. The H-type microbiota is structurally and functionally compromised, moving from an energy-producing to a putrefaction metabolism. So if there's not the bacteria in the gut, it's not breaking it down, it's just allowing it to basically rot in the gut. The microbiome alterations support the enrichment of genes belonging to pathobionts. And those are minor microbiota opportunists that are able to thrive in inflamed conditions. So, you know, when we have more inflammatory diseases in the elderly, it could be because they don't have the healthy bacteria in the gut to metabolize their foods properly. This study also proposes that the pathobiont overgrowth can nurture the sort of pro-inflammatory loop which can worsen the health status of the elderly. And then also they hypothesized that they really did see a difference in the gut flora of the subjects who were over 100. And they think that they have some type of a compensatory ability to keep healthy flora later on in life, and that helped slow the aging process. So isn't this fascinating? You know, it really, it's kind of like, wow. We kind of missed a great big area that really could have been very elementary and really help problems from occurring at the get-go. But like I said, everything's very preliminary. We don't know. It's kind of like way back when they said that vitamin A was good, and so everybody went out and took beta-carotene pills. Well, it's kind of the same thing. We don't know really what it is that's helpful, but it's interesting, and lots of research is going to go on now. So another study, this is in Nature in August of 2012. The study compared the fecal microbiota in 178 elderly subjects. And then some of them were living in the community, day hospital, rehab, or long-term residential care. And what's interesting is they found the microbiota in the long-term care residents significantly less diverse than that of our community dwellers, which isn't really surprising because, you know, I mean, we've got our sanitation standards, and, you know, everything in the kitchen is very highly regulated, as we dietitians make sure it is. We make sure that they store everything properly and cook it properly, and it has to be served at 140 or greater and then chilled within 2 hours. And then, you know, we keep the floors clean, and, you know, and we bathe them on a regular basis. But if they lived independently, they may not do that. You know, they may take a bath once a week. They may not have the most clean environment, like Dr. Oakes said, and some of us in home-based care get to see all kinds of good things in the home. And, you know, they may not, I don't know how many times I've walked into a home and they take their groceries straight out, if somebody drops it off, and it's sitting in the bag on the floor, and it never goes in the refrigerator. They just basically eat out of the grocery bag until it's gone, and then they move on. But they don't really get sick from that. So is that helpful or is that harmful? That's the question. So the loss of community-associated microbiota correlate with increased frailty in this study. But of course, the increased frailty was also those who were in a long-term care setting. Another study in Nature of 2013 studied the difference in the gut microbiome in subjects. It was a very small study, only 9 subjects. They took 4 and they gave them a plant-based diet, and 5 they gave an animal-based diet for 5 days. And so, mind you, very small sample, very small amount of time that they did this, but they found almost an immediate change in the gut flora between the 2 different diets. And then they did a washout period, and then they fed the opposite diets to the other groups. So the ones who were in the animal group then ate the plant, and vice versa. And within a day, they found the transition in the microbiota. So how interesting is that? There's still hope for us. So. But the animal-based diet was found to have increase in bacteria that support a link between dietary fat, bile acids, and the outgrowth of microorganisms capable of triggering the inflammatory bowel disease. And the plant-based diet had increased abundance of bile-tolerant microorganisms and decreased levels of firmicutes that metabolize dietary plant polysaccharides. And like I said, the gut flora changed rapidly based on the diet. So This is introducing the good bacteria, and so we're going to go over what the good bacteria is. So prebiotics, we hear a lot about probiotics, but we don't really hear that much about prebiotics. Prebiotics are, like I said before, the substrate that needs to be in the intestinal tract in order for the probiotics to live and thrive. So we need, in addition to taking probiotics, we need to make sure that we have our prebiotics so that we can keep our probiotics around. There are natural, non-digestible food ingredients that are linked to promoting the growth of helpful bacteria in the gut. And these include the fructo-oligosaccharides, such as inulin, and galacto-oligosaccharides, like fructans. And they're found in bananas, onions, garlic, leeks, asparagus, artichokes, soybeans, and whole wheat foods. So, you know, really, most populations eat a lot of onions. Quite a few, and almost all populations eat a lot of beans. So it's not just soybeans, it's a lot of beans. So, and these are all foods that we could include a little bit more into our diet in order to get more of the fiber, the substrate for the probiotics to live on. So sources of prebiotics, excellent would be the Jerusalem artichoke. Has anybody eaten one? No. Okay. I haven't either. So chicory root. Chicory root is very common, used as a coffee, especially in the Cajun, in the New Orleans area. So that helps to populate the intestine with the oligosaccharides. So if you look on the shelf, it's actually there in the coffee aisle, and it's the chicory root, and you can brew it just like a coffee. Leeks, if anybody's familiar, leeks are absolutely delicious. They have a wonderful flavor, and they can be used just like onions in any dish. White onions, raspberries, artichokes, cooked beans, and asparagus spears. Good would be garlic, wheat bran, nectarines, watermelon, banana, and pears. Okay are blueberries, broccoli, kale, red leaf, lettuce. And then zero are the ones that we Americans eat the most: the tomatoes, the carrots, and the green lettuce. So, so we kind of need to maybe add a little bit more, change up the type of greens that we eat, and maybe have a little bit more variety to our fruits and vegetables. So probiotics, there's lots and lots and lots of varieties. Unfortunately, we only have about 20 strains that are available to purchase. So the probiotics are the good bacteria, just like those naturally living in your gut, and they help to change or repopulate the intestinal bacteria. And the human gut has more than 1,000 different species of bacteria. So the best avenue is to obtain them from your food sources. So, you know, if you think about it, you know, if you think, I'm going to go out and get some probiotics, well, you can, but you're only going to get a very small section, you know, of what would naturally be living in a healthy gut. So it would be better to eat the foods that would give all those little things that we don't even know about and can't name at this point in time. So naturally occurring probiotics are yogurt, which I saw quite a few of you eating this morning. But you want to, you know, all yogurt would have some form of probiotic in it, some live cultures, but the ones that say live and active cultures guarantees that it has much more than the other varieties. And one of the advantages of the yogurt and the kefir would be that it is already partially digested, in that the lactose, or the milk sugar in those milk products, is already partially digested, so that those who have lactose intolerance can usually tolerate them fine. And then kefir is a fermented milk drink. It's kind of like a drinkable yogurt. The only thing to watch out for in the yogurt and the kefir, the ones that are purchased in the store, is all the additives that are added to it. You know, all the sugars and the coloring agents and things like that. If you look in the yogurt aisle, there's all kinds of varieties that are really targeted to, like, they look like Fruit Loop versions of yogurt. So you can also just get the plain yogurt, or you can make it yourself, and add your own fruit to it, or you can use it as instead of mayonnaise in a lot of recipes. So that's a way of introducing more of the bacteria. And then there's the kefir can be a fermented milk drink, and you can also make it as a tea. You can buy crystals and you can actually ferment it, and you can add, like say, fruit to it, and it's a drink, but it's not a milk product. So I've tried it. I haven't perfected it yet. When I made it, it was a little too fermented, so I need to work on it a little bit more. So the aged cheeses, we could, if you can find the ones that are aged naturally, that would help to give you some probiotics. The kimchi, which is the fermented spicy cabbage that's served along with a lot of Korean dishes. You can find it in Korean, Asian markets, and if you go to Korean restaurants, they usually serve some with their dishes, and the reason is because this helps to digest the meat that you're eating at the same time. The sauerkraut, made from cabbage and salt, the fermentation increases the glycosinolate compounds believed to fight cancer, similar to in the kimchi. There's miso, which is a fermented paste made from barley, rice, or soybeans. It adds a umami, or a very savory flavor, but it is high in sodium. But a little bit can go a long way. Tempeh is a naturally fermented soybeans, and kombucha is a tangy, effervescent tea. And if there's lots of recipes on how to make these, the kombucha, you have to buy this thing that looks kind of like a mushroom, and it grows in the tea. But it's very interesting. So you can make your own fermented foods. There's kefir, like we talked about, the water, the milk base, the kombucha, and then yogurt. You can make your own sauerkraut. Or like I said, the farmers markets are now this is quite a lucrative thing in the farmers markets, where they're selling the fermented foods that haven't been pasteurized. But in order to make your own kefir or kombucha, you can buy the crystals or the mushroom, and there's a lot of different websites, but this is one of them that's reliable. And then I've included the recipe for yogurt a little bit later. So to rekindle your microbial connections, you want to curb your use of antibiotics. I'm not saying by any reason not to take them. There's definitely reasons to take antibiotics when we're sick. They're lifesavers. But I guess to really consider, do you really need them before you take them? Is it just a sniffle that's going to go away in 3 days, or do you really need an antibiotic to take care of it? Open a window. I don't know how many, my daughter recently bought a home, and all the windows were fixed to where they wouldn't open, and there was no screens on any of the windows. And so I think we've kind of gotten to an air-conditioned society, and we don't even open the windows and let a cool breeze in. But there's a lot of good things that come in with the air, along with dust and other things that could come with it. So we want to open the windows and let some of the natural organisms in. Grow a garden. If you grow a garden, you're going to get foods that are fresher, that will have some of the natural microbes on them. And then they say preferably don't peel everything, and then you get a little bit more on the skins than you would if you peeled everything. Get a pet. They found that children and elderly who have pets are really more disease resistant, and that could be because they share their food with them, or get lots of kisses, and so they actually get they get more introduction to microbes, and so therefore they build up a resistance. Also, to wash with soap and water. This is at home, not in the healthcare setting. Here at the hospital, we want to use what's recommended, the antimicrobials and antibacterial and the gels, and as we're instructed. But at home, they're recommending that we use more of a soap and water and not the antibacterials, antimicrobials. So here's some of the research potential. This is here at the VA. This is Dr. Musi, who spoke on Wednesday, is leading up this study. And we have one of the study coordinators here with us if you have any questions. But this sounds extremely interesting. In this study, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you go in for an evaluation, you get blood work done, you get your gut bacteria analyzed, you do muscle biopsies, and you do that repeated with different types of diets, so you get to see really what's going on in your individual body. So it's quite intensive. It seems extremely fascinating, and by people participating in this type of research, it'll help answer some of the questions that are unanswered. So there's the phone number down there, or you could see Beverly if you're interested at all. It's something else that they're doing is called the Human Food Project, and this is international, but there is an American gut section. And so far they just started this in 2012, but they have more than 7,000 people enrolled. And the goal is to just see what's going on in the gut, and how it varies from Africa to London to San Antonio. And so here's the website that you can look at. But participation is really minimal. It's completing a questionnaire, a 7-day food journal, sending in $99, and a fecal sample. So really they'll be able to get quite a bit of information from that. So here's the recipe for yogurt. I'll let you all look at that later. But if you want to make it, you could. And then also if you want to look at any of the, look on any of your search engines on the computer, there's all kinds of good resources for fermenting foods. So now it's lunchtime. So now you have a choice in the back between the good for your gut box or the inflammation promotion box. So your choice as to which one you'd like. But if you just try to maybe incorporate just a teaspoon or so of the prebiotics and the probiotics every day, that would help to colonize your intestines and get them going in the right direction. So, are there any questions?
Any questions? Questions?
Okay.
No?
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you.
Okay, as she said, we'll break for lunch. It is noon, and we'll resume our next talk with Dr. Jennifer Keeley at 1 o'clock sharp, addressing pain at the end of life. So we'll see you back in about an hour. Thank you.